In addition to the funeral monument, you also have the somewhat well-known poem, right, at the base or in the cement.
Yes.
Have you decrypted any messages through that, or have you used that as a source for decryption?
I haven't. Other people have made varied attempts at doing that. I haven't looked at it just because all of those attempts have been, well, the majority of them have been pretty soundly debunked. So um, I've been kind of staying away from all of the stuff that already has a stink to it.
Okay.
In a matter of speaking, for example, the first folio. I'm not going to go looking for a biliteral cipher the way Elizabeth Gallup did, just because it's already been it's been tainted. Frankly, there has been a lot of shoddy decryption work done with a lot of this material, and I've been really trying to steer way clear of that, unless I find um, a clue that leads me in that direction. I stay away from it. When I found the name Thomas Harriot, uh, all of a sudden I'm like, well, I need to look at the Harriet material, and sure enough, he was an alias of Bacon, right? And here he is, a prominent scientist in history, and yet all of his own material also has the Bacon ciphers in it.
Wow.
So um, I don't publish anything, even if I have the actual cipher text. Okay, there's some real bombshells in this next book, and you're privy to a couple of them that I haven't shared yet.
Yeah.
And I don't do it until I have lined up enough corroborating evidence from alternative sources. Even though William and Elizabeth Friedman, the modern, they were he was the grandfather of the modern NSA here in the States. Um, they basically won World War I and II for us with their decryptions. They're cipher experts. They refer to ciphers as the they call them the bedrock of evidence, because again, as I said, if there's a secret message, it's a truth that is intended to be kept secret, except to be passed on to just a very small select group. And so that they can maintain and keep their secret, but it's recorded and they communicate it to each other. That's the purpose. And so you're not going to find lies. And so even though I have these cipher texts and there's just flat out spelling out, who Bacon's parents were, and so on. He says, yeah, my mother, Mary Queen of Scots. Um, I don't just only rely on that. I look for corroborating evidence. And so that's what I did say with Harriet. I went to his book that he actually wrote for our friend, Sir Walter Raleigh, uh, um, describing, his trip here in the colonies. And sure enough, the evidence was everywhere. So, it has more to do with this idea of repeatability, corroborating evidence, and if I don't have it, I try not to talk about it. But now that I have all of the evidence for the original messages that I found, they're going in this next book.
Okay. And you're not saying the 1623 is not a source to mine. It's just that the way this person used it's been debunked. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
But of course, as you've mentioned, and most Baconians know, the 1623 is filled with coded
it sure
messages.
is.
Yeah.
It sure is. Yeah. And I wish we could lay our hands on some of the original writings from, say, Christopher Marlowe, who I've identified as an early alias of Walter Raleigh, of all people. Walter Raleigh was the um, Shakespeare referred to the competing poet? No, um, the alternative poet. That's not the word. I'll think of it. But in the sonnets, you had the Fair Youth series, you have the Dark Lady series, and then you have the other poet series. Raleigh was that other poet.
Okay.
The Dark Lady I've identified, of course, as Mary Queen of Scots. This whole theory that William Shakespeare was in love with this horrid looking, ugly woman, but at the same time had a homoerotic fixation on the fair youth, who he was warning to stay away from the ugly woman because he was also in love with her. This idea of this bizarre love triangle is nonsense. I mean, once you see the truth, and I lay out all the evidence in my book, that whole story just really crumbles.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Dark Lady is Mary Queen of Scots. The other
Yes.
poet is Walter Raleigh. And
Rival poet.
rival.
Rival. Yeah.
Okay. And the fair youth is.
I'll save that for another time.
Okay. Okay.
If
Yeah.
you don't mind, because that's really getting into the big bombshell of at the heart of this next book. It's the one I intimated to you off air, and so like I said, as soon as I finally get this next one out, I'd love to come back on and talk about all of that, because that to me is really that's the heart and soul of all of these messages.
Okay.
It really is.
And how many aliases did you say Francis Bacon had?
Gosh, I don't even know. I've been able to unlock at least a dozen up to this point. Um, for Raleigh, I've uncovered, I want to say, 7 so far. But you have to remember that even though we have so much history recorded about these men, particularly later in life, we don't have a whole lot about their youth. We don't have a whole lot about their formative years between the ages of 18 and 30. They here and there, oh, he ran for parliament, but we forget that these were not full-time jobs. These guys were not punching a time clock, you know, 5 days a week, grinding out a living. These were landed aristocracy. They
Hmm.
they had freedom to pursue all of these pursuits and be intelligencers for Queen Elizabeth. That was their main goal. They were out spying. They spent the majority of their younger years spying for their queen and
So
and
Francis,
reporting back, to Essex and Walsingham.
okay.
You know,
So Francis
yeah,
Bacon and Walter Raleigh.
yes, in
Okay.
particular, and
Okay.
obviously not under those names.
Yeah. Yeah. Talking about the Shakespeare works, what is Francis Bacon's relationship to William Shakespeare or William Shakespeare? How are they connected?
Um, Shakespeare was, as we know, was one of the players in the King's Men, and basically what it came down to, I think that Bacon and the other Johnson and Raleigh and the others, I think they tolerated him with amusement, if you will. I think they were amused by him, especially when he started kind of strutting around as if he really did write the plays. They make jokes. There are plenty of jokes recorded about how he started to think very highly of himself, even because people were attributing these great plays to him when he was really only just one of the actors on the stage. And so I think that in a very real way that this would have amused this group of writers, and Ben Jonson in particular was the one that would kind of talk him down, I guess you would say. This is where in history we see there are two different things going on here. In one, Ben Jonson and Francis Bacon were best friends. A lot of people don't realize that. Ben Jonson lived in Francis Bacon's house for many years. Uh, Ben Jonson was the tutor of Sir Walter Raleigh's son Watt as well. So this connection between all these guys is really pretty tight. So on the one hand, you have Ben Jonson, sending darts at William Shakespeare. Uh, some of them he's making fun of Francis Bacon and his ability to write. But in others, he's actually sending darts at the actor Willem Shakespeare about how he says how he had no Greek and less Latin.
Mm-hmm.
The famous quote that there's no way that this guy really knows what he's doing.
Mhm.
And that was about the actor, right? But when he talks about that, oh, he has no art. He's poking fun at his friend Francis Bacon.
And did they set up what was William Shakespeare? Was he a front man? Did they pay him money? Did they?
I haven't found any evidence of that.
Okay.
I think, I mean, when we look at history and we know that he did come into some money, um, particularly towards the end of his life, uh, I imagine they must have paid him something to to kind of keep him quiet and just say, "Yep, fine, just take credit for it, but don't say a word." Um, I could see that happening, based upon what we know, what we think we know about recorded history. Um, but yeah, I really don't know the answer to that, Joe. I mean, it really is interesting um, because you don't see a whole lot about any of the relationships with the actor,
Right.
right? We just see these men of letters writing about the playwright, and so how much of that is really about the actor? How much of that is uh, people in the know writing about, say, the collusion of the efforts of both, Francis Bacon and Raleigh and Johnson? I don't know.
Okay.
Great question.
And Ben Jonson, as you mentioned, he was a famous playwright in his own right during the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And can you explore Baconian ciphers in his works, in his plays?
I think we could. I found in one of his masks, it was called The Fortunate Isles. And in that mask, he makes this is the mask he wrote for court, making fun of the Rosy Cross. Okay, and within that, there are cipher values encrypted in particularly the way he spells rotostoric, which is the term he used for the Rosy Cross. And in it there is Jophiel, which is the airy spirit of Jupiter, um, is having a conversation with someone who wants to join the Rosy Cross, and his name is Mere Fool. Um, and so you have Ben Jonson, making fun of this group that he obviously knew that it was all meant as a joke in the first place, because he says that it's led by a hermit living in a castle in the sky in a forest without trees, and his name is Otis. Now, if you remember your uh, Iliad and Odyssey, um, Otis is the name that Odysseus used when he killed the Cyclops. He got him drunk. Remember, he says, "Who is it?" He says, "Otis. My name is Otis." Otis being Latin for no one. And so when he gets the Cyclops good and drunk and then starts attacking him, the Cyclops is screaming for help from his friends, saying, "Help! Otis is killing me! Otis is killing me!" Everyone hears him saying, "No one is killing me." And so in that way, he was able to get away with it. So right here, Ben Jonson is saying that no one is in charge of the Rosy Cross, right? It's led by a hermit who lives in a castle in the sky, which doesn't exist, or in a forest without trees. He's telling us that it's not real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in that, that is a form of allegorical cipher, where he's just telling us the truth.
Yeah. Is there any insight into how these folks work together? Francis, Raleigh, Ben Jonson, and could you also who are some of the other pens that Bacon used in his works?
They're the three for sure, because there are other names that keep coming up, but I'm not so sure. I don't know if they're aliases or if they're something else, or if they're masks, or um, because you had mentioned, well, we were talking about Nash, Thomas Nash. Well, the name that keeps coming up for him in terms of an alias is Walter Raleigh. He would have been the first ones that I would have pointed to as being one of the good pens, but all of a sudden his name comes up and works out in the alias formula that I've discovered. It's possibly being another alias of Walter Raleigh. Um, I haven't looked into, say, John Donne. I haven't looked into what was one of the other names you had sent me?
Edmund Spencer.
Spencer. Yeah. Um, again, these are all really good candidates for being his good pens. And at this point, what I've been trying to do is just eliminate the possibility that some of those are masks or aliases, and really try to find out who, other than themselves and Ben Jonson, who else would have been helping them out.
Mm-hmm. And I believe Ben Jonson didn't, with reference to Walter Raleigh and his History of the World. Did Jonson once say the greatest minds in England have worked on that, or
No, he actually said that, and this is touching upon a little bit of the info, but Ben Jonson had famously, like I said, they were all very close, and Ben Jonson made a reference about Walter Raleigh, saying all of the best minds in London were involved in creating his history. So people have interpreted it that Walter Raleigh has a mysterious history.
so
Himself.
his life,
His life.
okay.
Yeah. And so now, we're looking at this man that we now know as Sir Walter Raleigh, and we know that he had multiple aliases. We know that he was a spy for the Queen. And so I started digging backwards to see what some of those identities might have been. And the answers are, just very surprising.
Okay.
I'll say that much.
Yeah. So a lot of the famous works in the early 1600s, do you think a lot of them can be attributed to this group?
Yes.
Because they
Yes.
had the knowledge, they had the access to the printing, they had the money.
They had the money. They had the ability, the mental ability, and the talent. They had the time, and I think that's the thing that we have to, as moderns, really pay attention. They had the time to do it, right? When you have, say, 3, 4, maybe 5 people working on these projects continuously, when you have them going out to sea, for example, Raleigh and Bacon, spending months and months at sea. Well, Bacon would have to go out, do a calculation, chart the course as Drake's first mate, and then he'd go back in the cabin. What's he going to do? He's going to continue to paint paintings. He's going to continue to write, and so that's what you have is time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you have this whole group of people doing the same thing, there's no limit to what they would be able to produce. When you consider, a modern writer in today's standards can write, more than 35 books in a lifetime. And, you look at these guys and over a period of a few years and they each write a dozen books or something. They have time to write more books as other names.
Yeah. And I think in Orthodox history, Bacon didn't have a professional position until his late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah, after King James becomes King James I of England, and he ascends the throne. Suddenly, you see Francis Bacon, his career jettisons. Well, because that's his younger half brother.
James the First is.
James the First is Bacon's younger half brother, and you even have at one point when James, I think he went to meet his wife. He left England for a month, and he left Francis Bacon as the king regent. Bacon was king for a month. You have multiple reports, of there was a birthday party for Francis Bacon, and he shows up wearing a purple suit, a color that is reserved for royalty only, for kings only. James the First was there at the party and allowed it. These things, people point to that as being evidence that, he was the son of Queen Elizabeth. Well, no. Why is this King James the First, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, why is he allowing Elizabeth's son to wear purple? No, he's allowing his older brother to wear purple.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, his career really professionally takes off once James ascends the throne.
Yeah, according to, like you said, Orthodox history, that's where we see him suddenly, taking on larger positions in court and in the government. And I think it was specifically because he was trying to help out James. And so, because James was known to get himself in trouble with Parliament all the time, and Bacon really sought to try to smooth things over. And of course, that's how he was able to make, such powerful enemies in Parliament. And so, yeah, that relationship, that secret relationship of them being half brothers is really key to understanding those behaviors, I think.
And James the First was also a writer in his own right, wasn't he?
Oh, indeed, yeah. He wrote a treatise on demonology, how to basically how to spot witchcraft, right? He also had a hand, uh, supposedly, in the writing of the 1611 King James Bible. And so he also there were a couple of other things that he had written that again, he knew how to do it. And the thing was, as king, you have to remember one of the things that people felt about writers and writing, that if you were going to be a poet, for example, you really had no place working in government. And so, his works were more along the lines of treatises on, like I said, demonology and things like that that he felt were important for the church and the state.
And this could lead to a connection with Macbeth, obviously, with the witches and nefarious.
100%.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
and being a
100%.
Scottish play, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, and you and I discussed too. So it seems like regarding the Shakespeare plays, Henry the Fourth, and it seemed like maybe part one more than part two, but that seems to be a big mine for ciphers. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, I told you I'm probably gonna anyone who wants to really delve into that. I highly suggest that's a great place to start. Um, and again, just look for signposts at first. Don't try to really pull too much out of it. Instead, just look for things that are appear to be mistakes. Right? Mistakes are always clues. Mistakes show you where to look. So if you see a blatant misspelling, or particularly uh, a page number that's wrong, that that's a big flag. Say, look here.
Okay. And that's particularly true of the 1623 folio.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
someone,
Uh, Especially the Tempest. So
Mhm.
much has been done with the Tempest, and it was the last play he wrote. It appears first in the first folio, and so what that does is it begs a closer look. And then you have the initials of TT, the double tau. Most people attribute this as meaning as being the initials of the number 33, which is the signature of the name Bacon in simple cipher. Um, so that's one interpretation of it. I have a slightly different one that I include in my next book. But again, those signposts are there, and those are the things to look for. Look for things that you think are wrong.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, the Henry plays, as far as that goes, that name is very significant. Obviously, we have just from the history plays of Henry himself, but it also harkens to Henry VIII, mother of Queen Elizabeth. It speaks to Bacon's uncle, the King of France at the time. So yeah, there's a lot there.
What was his main impetus to educate the world, to look at nature, to examine nature, and also to examine spirit? Was he kind of trying to tackle the two?
He believed that through reason and in inductive reasoning and the studying of nature, creation, by studying creation, you can come to understand the creator. He saw science and religion as being one and the same, or at least wanting to unify them in a way that did not have them at war with one another. Instead, he saw science as a means to understanding religion better and understanding God. So, by understanding creation, you could come to understand our Creator, and this would put you closer to the creator in a spiritual sense, and therefore there you have the spirit element, the spiritual element. And when it comes to education, that's what his book was about. One of his books, the idea of novum organum, a new instrument for learning. That's what it was about. Same thing with the instauration. He really wanted to um, have the world take on his notion of inductive reasoning, right? For those of you who don't know, inductive reasoning is you take what you know and you apply it to what you don't know and can't see, right? So a classic example, you see an animal with its tail sticking out of its burrow. Based upon the shape of that tail, if it's a tail of a ferret, you can inductively reason out what the rest of the animal looks like that you can't see inside the burrow, right? Or if it's a tail of a rabbit, you recognize, oh, okay, I know what the rest of that animal looks like. That's inductive reasoning, taking what you don't know, applying it to what is unseen. And this is also the key to understanding his cipher systems. I just took I knew that it would be based upon his style of logic of inductive reasoning. So I just took what I knew and then I applied it to what I was looking at in terms of his cipher messages. So when I started to look at those those transposition tables with all of the letters rearranged, once I found the context words, the letter T's and the big words that were very obviously there and intended to be used, they provided the context. So I use that context. That's what I know. Now let's figure out the other words around it that I don't know yet that fit this context. And so suddenly that's where all of a sudden you can start reading these messages using his inductive reasoning. And basically over the last, I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years now. He has taught me how to read his ciphers and how to identify his information. He set this whole thing up as if it were a school where if you just follow the clues, use his inductive reasoning, he will teach you how to decrypt his ciphers. And that's why I can do what I can do now, because he taught me how to do it.
Wow, fascinating. And you mentioned America way back. So what hand did Francis Bacon and Walter Raleigh, because we also know Raleigh was had a role in founding America. What was their thought of America? What did they want America to be?
Well, nothing less than Bacon's New Atlantis. That's what you see happening in New France, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, into Canada, and along the St. Lawrence River. I actually live a stone's throw from the St. Lawrence River up here in northern New York, and they saw this as Bacon's new kingdom. When he talks about being Champlain, he talks about ruling, his nation while he was here. He was the governor in charge, lieutenant governor, but the one actually in charge. So I think that's how they saw it. They saw it as an opportunity to create that vision that they had of a place where people could learn and have a society that's based upon kindness, goodness, and intelligence and learning.
More democratic. You weren't limited by birth,
right?
Who you were born to. Basically, a man or woman, but probably more of a man at the time, but could make what he wants out of his own life and not be limited by.
Because that's what he did, right? His birthright was taken from him in both countries, and so he said, "You know what? I'm gonna make what I want out of this, and I think other people should be able to be free to do this as well." Yeah, and so you see that sort of libertine philosophy in a lot of his writings, for sure.
And kind of the creation of a lot of universities too, right? Where you can study, you can share information, hopefully solve some of the riddles of nature, especially.
Absolutely. And you see that depicted in the image. It's called the Invisible College image. If you look up the Fraternity of the Rosy Cross. Actually, the wiki page for that is actually pretty good, and it has artwork, a picture of the building or the house that rolls on wheels and flies with wings. Talked about in the Fortunate Isles mask I talked about with Ben Johnson earlier. They actually draw that picture, and you can see Bacon sitting inside at a desk, but then you also see him, his life story, all the way around in different characters of him riding a horse, of him walking with a walking stick, and so that image in and of itself has that concept encrypted within it.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
the interpretation I've seen with that is that we're each an invisible college, right? We're each
Yes.
learning. We're each trying to.
Yeah, and in that image, you see letters, flying in and out of the windows, the letters with wings on them, and they're flying. And you also see, pigeons and so on. And that was one of the things that they did. They used carrier pigeons, to share their ideas, across the continent. And they eventually, once they created their network of scientists and thinkers, um, in what people now term, they believe to be the Rosy Cross, the Fraternity of the Rosy Cross. They were all just scientists and thinkers that were, sharing their information with each other, and that's how they were doing it. So they believed it to be, a college without borders, in a sense.
Okay. Okay.